of American Railroad Research and Test Department. He has worked in the rail industry for 40 years, both in freight and high-speed passenger railroading, predominantly in the field of track geotech engineering design. He has co-authored a book on the subject entitled Railway Geotech, and presently teaches this at a graduate level course at the University of Delaware. In 1994, he attained a doctoral degree in civil engineering from the University of Massachusetts, specializing in geotech engineering, where he wrote his dissertation on the engineering behavior and material characteristics of rock balanced in the track structure. After his retirement, he now performs volunteer work with Shamokin Creek Restoration Alliance that seeks to remediate the coal region by reducing acid mine drainage and improve water quality. Let's welcome Dr. Ismail.
Yes, it has been 40 years, and when you go away that long and come back, it's a shock. All this is new to me, but and then I worked for some decades, and now I'm retired. And I can recommend retirement as a wonderful time to do what you want. And what I'm doing as a volunteer is working with a wonderful group of people in the anthracite coal region of Shamokin, but of course there's the other towns around there, with the Shamokin Creek Restoration Alliance. So a group of plucky individuals, concerned citizens that want to make a difference. And nobody's paid, it's not volunteer, there's no money, and we don't have much money, of course, to work with it, but we, I think that this core group of individuals does a lot of good work. So if I could, I would click that hot link, and it would show you a wonderful video going through the town of Shamokin, following the snaky path of the Shamokin Creek, and the orange red color that we now know very well. I can't, because you can't get outside with internet here, but somebody who knows video drones much better than I do did a wonderful job of capturing that, so you could look at that on your own time. But that's what it shows. What I can show you is, from my own video drone, where Shamokin Creek ends. And this is just where it encounters the Susquehanna River water, right here at this border, where you can see a little bit of mixing and then that flowing down this way. But a stark contrast. Certainly the Susquehanna River is no model of pure water, but it has much improved from the days when I grew up around here. And I strongly remember the acid, the orange suds that would float down and from the north branch of the Susquehanna. And we as kids would swim in it without a problem. And in fact, when I was putting this slide together, I remembered, oh yes, in the 60s, a bunch of friends and I were building a fort or some kind of clubhouse, I don't know, right in there, away from prying parents' eyes. And we found, when we were looking for more material to build the fort, or whatever it was, we found a body up here of some individual around the Scranton area, floated down, and we found that. But as soon as the police came and took the body away, we were right back, right? They couldn't dissuade us from going there, acid mine, such or whatever. But one place we would not go, we had our limits, was over here. I mean, we go over, look at that, and we would run back, this way. It's clearly but we were put off by Shamokin Creek. So Shamokin Creek has a long way to go to be remediated to look something like Susquehanna. Here is another shot just below there, where now the Shamokin Creek terminates here, and this is Susquehanna. You can see the intermixing, the plume of acid mine drainage as it flows down to Harrisburg and going south, eventually going into the Chesapeake Bay. So, if you were to paddle up Shamokin Creek with a paddle from here, the southern end of Sudbury, where we just were, you would trace it back all the way into anthracite coal region shown here in gray. And some familiar towns, perhaps to you, to Trevorton or Shamokin, called Montgomery, and somewhere over here is Centralia, what's left of it. You'll also note that by looking at this image, there are a number of sampling locations over the years of the contributing streams going into Shamokin Creek, which is right here flowing out of Shamokin. This has been long studied, the area has, so that's really helpful. There's a very good database of information on flow, chemical characteristics of in the streams, the acid mine drainage, chemical content. And so we're going to build on that. In fact, I'll make reference to Charles and Kirby, and Cravata is a name that figures prominently in all of this. I'm going to refer to a lot of his research. It'll be Cravata and L. But what you see here then is the source of the problem. But it has been, as I say, long studied. That's to our benefit, and we're going to use some of that data going forward and build upon it. Here again now is that region, so I just zoomed into the gray area now in beige, I guess. And what you notice that the contributing streams going into Shamokin Creek right here is a lot of yellow dots. They pertain to all the mine discharges that are documented. There's more than what's shown, but those are the ones that we know of. And they all have their own characteristic, right? You'll notice a few red dots. They show what we at the SCRA, I'm a new person there, but going back decades now, 25 years or so, over those years they have installed a number of passive treatment systems, all different types, as you can see. But with the attempt at remediation of the acid mine drainage. As we say, there's a lot of yellow dots, a lot of sources at the surface, at ground surface, either maybe coming out of the mine entrance itself or right up out of the ground, but ground surface discharge. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could, now that we have this technology coming on, Penn State's Critical Minerals Department, looking at possible recovery of rare earth elements and critical minerals from acid mine drainage, from AMD. Well, this is what we've done up till now. You see these passive treatment systems. What about going forward if we could now look at doing this? And maybe not with passive systems, but with a new active type of treatment system. And where would you locate it? That's going forward, that's an issue that we need to address. There's all these different yellow dots. Where do you centrally locate such a facility? That's a question we have to resolve. So as we look at these, the data going along with each of these yellow dots to characterize, two things are of concern in terms of determining how economically beneficial it may be or possible to recover rare earth elements and critical minerals. This came to me from discussions with Dr. Paul Zemkowitz, I think is or he goes by Dr. Paul Z, from West Virginia University. He recommends determining if it's viable to try to recover this is to have a flow rate above a certain value and a pH of below a certain value. If you have those two criteria, you may be well along your decision path to say, yes, this might be a good location. Well, that looks favorable, because what I did was I took that data in from Cravata and Kirby, and I superimposed on it the shades of blue showing acceptability. Well, I should say this line of quality just means this is seasonal, right? So if you took a flow measurement in August and also in March, and obviously it's less flow like right about now, and so that's why it looks like it does. But the point to note is how many data points are in the zone pass both criteria. Looks hopeful until you start looking at identifying these data points with the locations. And unfortunately, it turns out that especially, well, here's one, for example, that has a rather low flow, a low pH, which is desirable, but a low flow. In fact, sometimes it's zero. Well, in other words, there's only a handful, a few ground surface sources that satisfy both criteria. So we're kind of in a bind there. What other options could we do? Maybe not focus so much on ground surface AMD, but what if we went into the mine pools? What if we went underground and brought the water up for two purposes, to treat the water, of course, but also possibly to extract rare earth elements and critical minerals. So now here's a study by Good, and there's Cravata again, and L. And what they did was they looked at this study area here shown within the heavy black line. And especially in the yellow zone, because that's our creek of investigation for this case. So we're very interested in the yellow especially, and AMD's contributors to Shamokin Creek right in that area. Some of the town names, again, are familiar to us. There's Centralia. So what they did was they looked at that study area and broke it down into mine pools, underground mine pools, as mapped out as best information we have, shown by those various colors. It turns out that each of these, or let me say it a different way, very often more than one mine pool combines to form what's called a, let me go to the next one, a multi-colliery hydrologic unit. In other words, it could be that a number of these mine pools are actually hydrologically connected. Right? So the water raises and lowers independently within one mine, within one MCU compared to another one. And the reason that happens is, here you can see the barrier walls, the barrier pillars, shown in black lines. And if you go from one slide to the next, you can see how that works out. Now, in some cases, individual mine pools might be their own MCU, such as Big Mountain and North Franklin. I'll go back, you can see that. See how that's preserved? But in other cases, such as, where is it, the Cameron MCU is comprised of a number of individual mine pools. But again, they're interconnected, so they form an MCU. So that's kind of how we have to look at this and to investigate, because each MCO is not created equal. We assume that each one may have its different characteristics, content, or concentrations of REE and CM. That has to be investigated. Let's see, so that's just 1/3, the western third of the study area. We also have for the middle, there it is, and also the easternmost right here. So we're just going along this study area right here. A number of individual multi-colliery units, hydrologically independent of each other, basically. And you'll see in there all these black dots pertaining to a water level borehole. Some of these MCUs have one, some have none, some have several. Well, what they allow you to do is to go in there and determine the volume of water. That's another interesting aspect to all of this, and useful potentially. So we're talking about sampling the water within the mine pools, within the MCUs, for rare earth element content, and also the volume of water, as we'll discuss in just a bit, the uses. And of course, one way to find that is to go in and do a test, do a pump test. When you do that, you have a water table drawdown, which you can measure. You know the amount of water that you pumped out, and from all that, you can determine how much volume of water is in that MCU. Sometimes you need a observation well. Maybe not. It would be nice not to do that because extra cost. But if we do need to, here's a case where you may well need to. If the drawdown cone is unsymmetrical, asymmetrical, then you may need more than one, certainly 2 or 3. But as I tell my students, that's not an easy thing to do. You have to take care so that the water level you're sampling from, or trying to determine the hydrostatic surface, is down a layer. Water does not come down and sort of mess up your measurement. So again, you do these observation wells if you need to, but they do come at a cost. But if you do this sort of thing and do the water pump out and draw down test, here's a simulation, but this looks like what you might well measure. This is an actual case in Wilburton, Pennsylvania, where there is mine pool water that is extracted for industrial use. And there's other places around the country, around the world, that this is done as well. And here you can see the drawdown is unsymmetrical, so we probably need some observation bore wells. But interesting too, what results is you can see the MCU wall barrier. See that? Sort of like very sharp delineation here. You can see the aerial extent. And now with a pump test, you can determine the volumetric content as well, how much water is there. Now here's where we are. When we talk about locating where such a facility might go, we want it to be on public land. We have that information. We want to compare that with the slide before. Where is it? Right here. Overlay public lands on top of this, and then we can determine, well, where is the most desirable MCU that we want to go after? Okay, where is the public land within that area? All these considerations would go into weighing that factor. So I don't want to say it's only acid mine drainage that the area is blessed with, but there is of course solids, mine tailings, as Professor Arnold was mentioning too, in abundance. This is one of many. And in fact, this goes back in my memory when the Aberfan Wales mine disaster was 1963, I think. And maybe some of you remember that. And the grown-ups were all concerned looking at this one, as if you go into Shamokin, this is looming over some people's houses. But back in the day, it was much more massive, and the slope angle was higher. It's been cut back and benched, so now we're not so concerned about the stability. Although I did do an analysis of that in my grad school years here for Dr. Beniowski, mechanics professor, and it was very big at that time. But so yeah, again, not a slope stability issue maybe, but there it sits, and material is going into the groundwater. Can we, in fact, do something about that to reclaim or extract rare earth elements and critical minerals? There is some thought that that is possible. In fact, I understand there's a working group looking at ways to sample this, and I've been with enough soil drillers to know it's complicated to, it's hard to get representative samples when you're taking soil drilling and sampling with just the way nature lays down soils. It's probably even harder to get a representative sample with a man-made embankment that is even more variable, vertically and laterally. And yet, we would like to be able to do that, so I'll look forward to whatever the working group comes up with regarding recommended ways to sample that. But if we do try to process this and recover rare earth elements, there is some thought. Why can't I go forward? There. No, that's too far. There it is. There is a process that through fluidized bed combustion, the thinking is that if you pre-process that within a temperature range that's shown there for a limited amount of time, that can enhance and improve the ability to extract rare earth elements and critical minerals with subsequent acid leaching. Right? But to do that, it has to go from some kind of a bench study to the full-scale production facility, such as, here's one example, a co-generating plant that can do that. And I stopped in there and talked to some people, just getting some information, but there are, I guess, a number of those around. That's one that I'm aware of. But it would have to be this sort of production type facility that would be able to handle a lot of material, bulk material. Let's see. So I guess that's, let me wrap up then. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time.
So now about 8 minutes.
Okay, good. Well then, yes, to wrap up, so what we're talking about, or looking at, is possibly doing controlled pumping from these MCUs. Remember, that's multi-colliery hydrological units. Hydrologically connected mine pools, plural usually. And we can reduce the acid mine drainage discharge to the stream if we reduce the elevation. And again, in a controlled way. Also, to determine the water volume stored in the mines in this particular study region, what we call the Western Middle Anthracite Goldfield. The amount of volume of water is estimated to be between 60 and 220 billion gallons, quite a lot. And it's a big range too, so because there's a lot of uncertainty. And the uncertainty comes from, well, what is the bulk porosity? In other words, how much mine subsidence has occurred to make the mine collapse in certain areas to reduce that void, the amount of voids, and therefore the storage capacity. But we don't necessarily have to get better at estimating the bulk porosity. We could do these NCU MCU drawdown measurements, and then determine how much volume is in each of the MCUs, whichever ones you're looking at. And the reason for looking at the volume of water there, that'll be the last slide. Okay, talking also about sampling the water in the MCU to determine the concentration levels with depth of rare earth elements. And there's some thought that the deposits, or I should say, the concentration levels may change, possibly increase with depth, that there could be a layering within the water, within the water depth. But testing will tell that. Let's see, oh, and then lastly, yes, so all of this feeds into the question of if we are able to get, let's say, an active type of site, an active treatment facility, where would we locate it? Where would we site it? There's a lot of information that has to go into that decision, but here we're discussing some of those. And the last slide I have is so the potential uses of mine pool water. As we look into remediating acid mine drainage and trying to revitalize the area, which certainly needs it economically and so on, we consider that there's a number of things that could be done. And the further we go, we think, oh yeah, it's sort of like, wait, there's more. Oh wait, there's still more we can do. And so this is offered in that sense. Beyond rare earth element recovery, the area could be, the mine pools could be used as shown there. In fact, presently they are being used for that first bullet point in Gilberton, Pennsylvania. The mine pool water is being drawn up and used to cool, for cooling in power plants. And there's other industrial uses, but we could consider beyond that, and what people around the world are using mine pool water for. An example is a source of shallow geothermal energy. I qualify that by saying shallow because it's not, the temperature gradient, the temperature differential is not that great. So, but it is a source of some geothermal energy potentially. And the last one I'll mention is, again, something that people around the world are looking at is possibly pumped storage hydropower. And the idea there is, if you have electric pumps, of course you pump the water up to the higher elevation at night when demand is lower and cost is lower. And then during the day when demand is higher, you let the water go back down. Or, in the case of where Centralia, which just happens to have a number of these wind turbines along the mountaintops. Centralia is over here. Really not much to see, but it is over there, so just beyond the strip line. And possibly that mine pool water could be used to be pumped up when the wind is blowing, using the wind energy, and then when the wind is not blowing, the water go down through water turbines and generate power that way, removing the intermittency problem with a lot of renewable energy. The sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, but this can be an aid to that regard. So we're thinking in many different ways, very ambitious, you could say, but the area needs it. People need the hope, and it needs to be economically revitalized. So that eventually, someday, that stream that I showed you at the beginning, aquatic life could return to it, people could be fishing from it, and kids would not be scared to go in the water. So I thank you for your attention.
I'm not sure about the structure of your organization. I assume it's some sort of nonprofit. So the capital requirements for what you're describing, would you be able to fund that with grants, or would you be looking for investors? How would all that play out in your mind?
We would be looking for funding from government agencies. They're starting to look in our direction. Now, we would like to try to guide that and be selective in what we're asking for. Like I tried to say, we would like the testing to be done in certain ways to really fully characterize it, but we don't want to over-ask, right? We want to, whatever funds we're able to get from state or government, state or federal government, it has to be well spent. So we want to be educated consumers and only ask for the right things that are going in a certain direction. So that's what we're trying to educate ourselves in that regard. Yeah, but right, it's not, I mean, I'm thinking it's mainly government funding, because again, the interest is mainly at the federal level. And where do we get critical minerals and rare earth elements? Domestically. So we're saying, yeah, consider us.
One more question.
Have you been able to reliably extract any critical earth, critical minerals or rare earth metals, anything like that?
Just starting to look at that. We're really excited to be working with the Penn State group in that regard. But we've only just started communicating that, and we're looking to sample in cooperation with the group that is, I think I'm just now forming the ideas of how do you sample. And that's part of what we're doing, I think. So we're paying attention to what's going on there, and hopefully we're cooperating. It's all just starting. It's all very